So whatever you learn in programming, I think most of you starts with a hello world application. So this is the thing that we usually start with logging. This is how we start. This is how our logging application starts. So I have a question to you. Who of you have seen logs looking like that, even in production? Yeah, so have you seen these like passwords in logs, right? All these fancy things.
Yeah, so I think that doesn't really get us far, is it? So I think we're going to have to, we're going to have to think about telemetry in a different way, and this is what Robert and I will be talking about today. My name is Dan. If you're from Edinburgh, you might know me from drumming at, weird places and parks. But yeah, so I do like drumming, but this is not what I'm talking about today. You might know me from, this is my GitHub handle, and also this is my personal website. I'm a principal observability architect at New Relic. I have been working in platforms for almost 15 years from, for example, CERN in Geneva or recently Skyscanner. I'm part of the OpenTelemetry governance committee and also maintainer of the end user special interest group. And I've got a book that is called Practical OpenTelemetry. It's about 2 OpenTelemetry years old, which is about like 20 years in human years. And that's all about me.
So I'm Robert Pająk. I'm not from here, I'm from Krakow, but who knows this place? From where is this photo? Yeah? Yeah, so I highly recommend going there. So far the best place in Edinburgh in my opinion. So my handle on GitHub is Pelaret. I'm contributing a lot in open source medicine, OpenTelemetry, so you can find me creating pull request issues. And basically, I work in at Splunk. Splunk, which is a Cisco company right now, similar to Isovalent, is paying me for doing open source. So I'm mainly a OpenTelemetry Go maintainer, but also a specification sponsor. And I basically contributing to logs in OpenTelemetry for more than 2 years, or about 2 years. But I was doing logging for much longer than that. Disclaimer, I'm not an English speaker. So if you have problems understanding me, don't blame my English, it simply means that I have no idea what I'm talking about. I have a question to you, Dan. Does it mean that I just need more pillars than logs, right?
Yeah, so I think the concept of there's more logs and more pillars than logs, right? But the concept of pillars is a bit outdated. I think, pillars as, different isolated signals that we send to maybe one or many observability backends. You might send your metric somewhere and your log somewhere else. They create silos. So if you think about telemetry and pillars, it creates silos. Silos between signals. So you don't know if what's happening in metrics is correlated to your logs, is correlated to your traces. You don't have the evidence to do that. So you end up basically having to manually correlate things, put things in a dashboard somewhere, and then sort of see if they align. And they also create that create silos between services. You probably deploy in a complex distributed system, service mesh, and sometimes we forget that there is an upstream and there is a downstream. We just go hey, my service is working, everything's fine. But what if you want to correlate container throttling, or CPU throttling in Kubernetes containers, to the experience that your end users are getting, to your core web vitals? You're going to need more context of that. With no shared context, you're missing data there, right? You're just basically guiding yourself by intuition rather than evidence. So it's all about context, and it's all about correlation. The word context is thrown around a lot in Gen AI these days, but it's really all about context. The context that you can give your observability platform to give you insights on top of that data. So if you start from, for example, that user that's having a poor experience, those core web vitals that are produced from browsers, now with OpenTelemetry, we can propagate trace context all the way down from the browser to backend services. What you see here is the representation of a distributed trace. Thanks to Whitney that already covered before what a trace is. Each one of these is a span, it goes through multiple services. Each one of these colors, for example, here will represent a different service, right? But then you've got metrics now that are correlated to the same thing. In OpenTelemetry, there is a concept called exemplars, which give you examples of traces that were going through the system when a particular data point was recorded. So if you have a team that is being alerted for a backend regression, let's say on the duration or the HTTP server duration is going up, now you can start to correlate that to traces that were going through that system when that increased duration was happening. And we've also got semantic conventions that allows us to correlate telemetry from multiple pillars as part of the same source. So it's all coming together representing the same entity, right? And soon, we will have continuous profiling correlated to these traces as well. So if you're seeing that something is happening in a trace, you can sort of like double click and then go down into the call stack of that particular replica as it was recorded in a trace. So, traces, metrics, we don't need logs anymore, do we, Robert?
Yeah, I think that why don't you were talking about context correlation and trace correlation about 3 minutes, 5 minutes. I think I can just add it to the logs, right? It will be cool. Why do we need anything more? So why would you just add this trace context to logs? It's everything that we need. So in OpenTelemetry, the logs data model. So this is just. It's just a memory representation. It doesn't have to be JSON. Just a disclaimer, because sometimes people ask me. The telemetry is not just it's just a text message, a one line in standard output or whatever. It basically is a timestamp, but no, there are 2 timestamps. One is one suffix happened, and second, when was it recorded. Then we have this trace context, which Dan was talking about. We have also severity and 2 types of severity, because sometimes log records are coming from different libraries. So we have a textual representation for a logging library, and also a number, threshold level severity, so we can filter out logs easily. And also we have a body. Body can be, for example, a log message. And we have additional logging fields and metadata. We have also the information about the instrumentation scope. Instrumentation scope, the OpenTelemetry can be your logger name. It can be also a name of your component of your application. And also in OpenTelemetry, you have resource. Resource is the information about your software that you have deployed. So the name of your service is working on staging, the version, etc. So in the OpenTelemetry logs, it's just not a text with a timestamp. It's a structured log. So it is about structured logging. And what is more interesting, the attributes and the log message body, the log record body, sorry, is a complex. It's a complex type. So we call it any value, and it can be one of a primitive, of course. It can be a string, number, double floating, number precision. It can be an array of any value. And it is a heterogeneous array, meaning the first element can be an integer, the second can be a string, the third can be an array. It can be a map from a string to any value. So it gives you the opportunity to represent any object. So you can basically, for instance, add as an attribute your whole payload that you're sending via an HTTP request if you want. It can be a binary large object, something which isn't supported by JSON, for instance. And it can be also an empty value, because who loves nil and nulls in programming languages, right? Yeah, so here's just an example. Right now, everyone is doing AI. So we have an AI example how an attribute could look for attributes for a prompt, for observability, for AI. So, but still, I love logs. Can I use logs then everywhere? Do you think that it will be a good decision?
I don't think it's about using logs or using spans or using metrics. It's about using all of them. I think each of them has a purpose. So if we are starting with metrics, I think metrics, everyone's familiar with metrics. They are a stable signal. What we mean by stable signal is that it doesn't matter if your application is receiving 1 million or 1,000 requests per second. You will generate metrics at a relatively stable amount of telemetry volume, right? So you generate them at frequent intervals. So that makes the metrics and the aggregation of metrics. You have different statistical aggregations that you can create from these measurements. That makes them great for alerting, because they're stable. Makes them great for long-term trend analysis. But they're not that good for debugging, for basically understanding what goes on inside a system, right? But that lower volume can make them more reliable. So if you're providing if you've got an observability platform and you want to provide maybe different levels of reliability for different types of data, metrics is probably one where you can provide a higher SLA, because you can retry metric export for longer, or you can use pool-based, and then the definition of metrics becomes more, or the actual resulting data may be more reliable, right? The important thing with metrics is to keep the cardinality low. Otherwise, the aggregation that we were talking about, it starts to be useless. As in, like, if you generate one data point per request, then that doesn't really make any sense in terms of aggregation, right? But we can correlate them with semantic conventions and with exemplars to traces. Now, traces do have that high granularity, that context. The trace is actually the backbone of correlation of all modern telemetry data. So they allow you to basically debug your workloads, work on optimization, short-term trend analysis, and then you can also generate metrics from spans as well, right? But that high volume does mean that it's a bit more expensive to queue, more expensive to retry. But the good news is that with tracing and with context, we can do better sampling, more ways of, like, there's head sampling, tail sampling. There's a long, I would be here for another 20 minutes if I were to explain that. So I'm not going to explain that, but there are better ways of making sure that we store the information that is useful to us and discard the rest. And as well, we've got logs. Logs, they still have their uses, right?
I have logs.
Logs. We have background, anything that is not perhaps in the context of a trace, like background tasks, startup shutdown. We've got applications and libraries that are using logging already, and that you don't need to start to, or you might not be able to move to span data or to trace data, but you can inject that context into the logs and then correlate them. And as well, very important, anything related to that requires a discrete event to be published, like a client side, browser, mobile, infrastructure events, GenAI, as Robert was just mentioning, and soon profiles. I think I just keep saying soon profiles, but it is coming. So you will be able to correlate that as well. So let's go through an example, and I understand that basically this is Kubernetes community days, and I'm going to be talking about Java, which is my language of choice, probably not the one of many in this room. But anyway, so we'll go through an example of what it is to use all these three signals together. What you've got here is a quick, Java script. We're just going to run it and generate some data, right? The first thing we do is we get a tracer, a meter, and a logger that will allow us to create these instruments and this data that we'll be recording. This is part of the OpenTelemetry API, right? We create a standard list of attributes, in this case we just have one single attribute in that list, and we're going to use that attribute across these three things: logs, metrics, and traces. We'll register a counter metric instrument. So an instrument is basically allows us to record measurements. In this case, this is a counter, so we'll be increasing or incrementing this counter in our code. And then we create a span. We activate that span in the current context. So basically what that means is that context will be implicitly propagated to the other signals, and as well to, if you had an HTTP client, that will be propagating to your upstream as well. So we increment that counter by 3, just simple instruction, with the same attribute, and we emit a log record. And then we end the span. We always need to remember to end the span, to stop counting, basically. So what happens if I run this? If I run this script, I have not defined what I want my telemetry to be sent. Anyone?
This is a question to you.
It's a question to you. What happens if I run this script? Can anyone tell me? Will it go to console?
Come on, don't be shy, otherwise he'll be talking more.
Will it go to console? Will it fail? Will it fail to maybe I've not defined it? So what happens, Robert?
Nah, it will do nothing.
It does nothing. And this is one of the magic things of OpenTelemetry, is the separation between the API and the SDK. You can take that code, run it, give it to your best friends, and go hey, you can run this. There's no side effects if you don't configure an SDK. Really important if you maintain a library or an application. It means that you don't have to decide where the data is sent. That can be done by the user when they run your script. So I'm going to run this, but this time I'm going to use the OTel Java agent, which initializes the SDK. You can do that in code, or you can do that with, you can use the agent that uses the auto-configure API. And you can give it a service name. We'll give it KCD demo, and we give it this time I'll give it an OTLP endpoint that will point to, and that's a local collector that I'm running. And then we get correlated signals. What you see at the top is that all these signals are coming from the same resource. So these three are basically batches of data that the collector is getting, right? On the left side, we've got metrics. In the center, we've got the trace. And in the right-hand side, we've got logs. All of them have the same resource attributes, including the process, the PID of a process. We've got the service name. There's a bunch of other attributes. And then, we've got the counter, how you increment it, really the value of the actual data point. We can see on the left-hand side, on the bottom, you see the trace ID, or the exemplar and the trace ID and the span ID, that correlates to the trace, to the span that you saw there that we created in that context. And the log as well will have the same trace in the span ID. So all these are now correlated. The only thing I had to do was just set an OTLP endpoint to my collector and a service name. So, who defines good telemetry? So we talked about all these different sort of like signals that you can use, but when do you actually use one or the other? Who's heard of semantic conventions here? Cool, right, so they are a way to measure and describe common concepts, and the result of this is high quality telemetry. So it's not just the names and the attributes. It doesn't just mean that you define how to name a span or how to name a metric or what attributes to send. They also define when to use each signal. So if you're thinking about a concept that you want to measure, we can say, well, this should be a metric, this should be a span, and so on. And the resultant is, yeah, that set of stable telemetry that can be used by OTel and non-OTel libraries. So anyone is able to use these semantic conventions. In fact, we want more people that are not maintaining OpenTelemetry to start to use these semantic conventions in their applications and their libraries. And it's all common language for all platforms as well. All vendors can speak the same language, all observability platforms can speak the same language and start to provide insights on top of data. Who defines the semantic conventions? I can tell you it's not this. It is not a room where OTel maintainers go and say, like, okay, we're gonna name this whatever, like, end user.id. We don't come up with this stuff ourselves. We work. It would be a lot easier. It would be a lot easier if we just sat in a room and said, like, we're going to name this list. But no, it's a collaborative effort, right? We want to get more maintainers and users and all the stakeholders to come and work with us to define these conventions. The way that it works is through prototypes. So we get some instrumentation packages out there and we say, well, let's try this out, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, well, then we'll change it. And then everyone will complain because we changed the semantic convention. But the idea is that, it's a collaborative effort and we want more people to be involved in this. What about logs, though? Are there semantic conventions for logs?
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, there are a lot of areas regarding these attribute registries. So we have cross-cutting attributes, which are basically for each signal, metrics, traces, and logs. So for instance, if you have a log record, you can have a code line number attribute which tells you which line of code emitted a log. You can have an exception message, so you know what have crashed, and you have also the service name deployment environment, so you know what application crashed and where. You have also signal-specific log attributes, so like we're asking for logs. So there are also some only related to logs. But there are also domain-specific attributes, which are usually the most important, the keywords when we need also, your feedback. So for instance, attributes for HTTP, for databases, for GenAI, everyone loves GenAI. And also there are CI/CD deployments, semantic conventions, etc.
No, that's a question for me to you, Robert, because I think, logs, events, what's the difference? I think, we've heard about a lot of discussions about logs versus events, so I want to know where it is.
Yeah. So I will be talking about OpenTelemetry because there is a lot of confusion, what is event and what is log. So in OpenTelemetry, we define that basically an event is a log record with an event name, which defines the structure, how the record will look like. So if we have an event record, we say that it will always have the same set of attributes and it will represent the same thing that happened. So basically there's an approximation that a log record says something happened, and the event record said that something important has happened that we actually care about. And so I just prepared a simple example. A log record from a logging library can look like this, that a user logged into successfully, there's some severities for a logging library, some additional field. And the event record can simply look like this one. So we have a semantic convention calling that if the event name is called user login, it means that it means across all other applications and software that it means that a user has logged in. And we just need a severity number and attributes, so it's more packed and it's a common thing across other things. So I'll cover this one. So basically, the important thing, so these are purple because these are things that are coming to OpenTelemetry. So basically, if you remember, I was describing this concept of these complex values in attributes and log message body. So this type are coming also to traces and metrics and profiles. So complex values are coming to all signals because it occurred that people need them as well. And now it's up to you.
Yeah, so one of the things that, when I was talking about semantic conventions, you might be thinking, okay, so that's in the OpenTelemetry side, common concepts. But what do I do if I want to, maintain my own semantic conventions? I would urge everyone to check out Weaver. Weaver is a tool that allows you to manage your own semantic convention registry, and you can define your own domain-specific semantic conventions. You can extend semantic conventions from the global registry. You can come up with your own ones. It allows you to generate code as well automatically that will basically use your semantic conventions. It will allow you to validate registries, to integrate it in your CI/CD. The idea here is that observability should be something that you do by design. It's not something that comes after you deploy a new feature, right? It's something that needs to be part of your development workflow to add telemetry to it and to make it stable. And that's what Weaver gives us. We have a couple of talks as well that will evolve from some of the concepts that we just spoke about today. Robert will be talking at KubeCon about logs. I would basically, if you are at KubeCon Atlanta in a few weeks, please go and see Robert's talk. I will also be talking about, the bad side of this. There's a lot of bad telemetry out there, so how do we make it better? With Jurasi from one of my colleagues from the OpenTelemetry Governance Committee. And so a couple of key takeaways.
Yeah, from my side, the main takeaway is there's no single bullet, so logs does not work for everything as Dan told. So, and also, if you have the semantic conventions, make sure that these are recommendations, they are common things, but you always need to tailor the things to the pieces that you actually need. So whenever you're doing, anything in software, make sure to test everything that you're using, make sure you benchmark your stuff, just make sure that you're not blindly using recommendations. Also, if something is not working, just create an issue and give us feedback.
And the last one is that you're in charge of the telemetry now. Even if you're an application owner or you're a library maintainer, the telemetry that you produce is part of the API in a way that you give your users, right? It's part of the data you give them. With OpenTelemetry, we've seen that you can use the API without having to configure the SDK, which means that you can just give people your code and allow them to have agency, have ownership of their telemetry. So yeah, just once again, I'm asking you to use the OTel libraries natively and then give your users the freedom to select where they push their telemetry to.
Okay, Dan was talking a lot, me as well, probably. Mm-hmm. So this is a QR code for the slides if you're interested, but now it's your time to ask questions. It's your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.